The lab was never the same after the rift incident. Every scientist who had witnessed it was haunted by fragmented memories of things that could not be explained. Time had cracked, and though they had sealed the breach, something had slipped through. Or worse, something had changed. Amelia Carter sat in the control room, staring at the looping security footage from that fateful night. No matter how many times she watched, she could never see the entity clearly. The figure that had flickered into their world was not bound by time, shifting between past and future like a ghost lost in endless corridors of reality. But one thing was certain: it had spoken, and it had warned them. She rewound the footage to the exact moment before the rift had sealed. Elias Carter's distorted voice echoed through the speakers. "You can't stop them. You can only contain them. You have to choose. Shut it down, or let them in." The question that haunted Amelia's mind was, had they really shut it down? The experiment that shouldn't have happened, despite the warnings, the research had not stopped. The board of directors, fueled by arrogance and greed, demanded further tests. They weren't convinced by the mysterious phenomenon. They wanted proof, something tangible, something they could control. Dr. Malik had argued against it. "We barely survived the last breach. We don't even understand what we were dealing with. If we push further, we might trigger something irreversible." But their protests fell on deaf ears. The Chrono Key project was reinstated under Project Paragon, a classified directive meant to study the nature of time distortions without direct engagement. That was a lie. 2 days later, they conducted a new experiment. The rift was reopened. The new breach, unlike before, the breach wasn't chaotic. It didn't appear as a violent rupture in space-time. This time it was silent, too silent. The scientists in the lab stared at the glowing circle in the air. Unlike the unstable flickering they had witnessed in the past, this was controlled, deliberate. A smooth, spinning vortex no larger than a human stood at the center of the containment chamber, rippling softly like a reflection on water. Dr. Malik tightened his grip on the console. "Something's on the other side." A technician swallowed nervously. "We're picking up biological readings. It's alive." Amelia's heart pounded. "Is it Elias?" There was no answer. The swirling rift distorted slightly, its shape twisting like a living thing, sensing its surroundings. Then, from the depths of the vortex, a figure emerged. At first it seemed human, tall, dressed in a form-fitting black material that shimmered like liquid metal. But when it stepped fully into the lab, they realized the truth. It wasn't wearing a suit. That was its skin. The figure turned its head slowly, as if adjusting to its new environment. Its face was eerily human, yet subtly wrong, too symmetrical, too smooth. Its eyes, deep black voids, reflected nothing. Then it spoke. "You should not have opened the door." The voice was layered, as if multiple versions of itself were speaking at once. The words were not a warning. They were a statement of fact. Time unraveled. The air in the lab became heavy, thick, suffocating. Some of the scientists gasped, their lungs struggling to function as though gravity itself had shifted. The figure raised its hand. The room flickered, reality fractured. One moment the lab was intact, the next it was a decaying ruin, flickering between possibilities. The scientists looked around in horror. Their own bodies were shifting. Some flickered between different ages, their younger selves, their older selves. Some vanished completely, as if they had never existed in this version of time. Dr. Malik collapsed, his body disassembling and reassembling. He looked down at his hands in horror as his fingers elongated and then shrank in rapid succession. "We're not supposed to be seeing this," he gasped. The figure tilted its head, watching, studying, learning. Amelia struggled against the pressure in the air. She reached for the emergency override switch, the only way to shut down the breach, but the figure turned its gaze toward her. Her past selves flashed before her eyes. A child playing in her backyard. A teenager discovering her passion for physics. A scientist unlocking the Chrono Key. Then, the future. She saw herself standing before a ruined Earth, an empty sky where the stars had been devoured. She saw the figure beside her, and she saw herself becoming it. "What are you?" she gasped, fighting the images overwhelming her mind. "We are the consequence. We are what happens when time is no longer bound. We are you, from the end." The final choice alarms blared in the collapsing lab. The walls flickered between destruction and stability. Amelia fought against the overwhelming weight pressing on her mind. There was only one option left. She reached for the manual shutdown. The figure took a step toward her. "You will not remember, but we will return." With every ounce of strength she had left, she slammed the kill switch. A shockwave of energy burst from the control panel, flooding the room with light. The vortex collapsed. The figure faded into nothing. Amelia fell to the ground, gasping for breath. The world around her stabilized. The lab was intact, untouched. Dr. Malik was gone. The remaining scientists looked around, confusion and fear in their eyes. They had survived, but at what cost? The rift was closed. But the words of the entity echoed in Amelia's mind. "You will not remember, but we will return." She had stopped them, for now.